April day. I think everybody enjoyed our spring. Took place Saturday morning between about 8 a.m. and early afternoon, and then we were done with spring. But we're here with Saul Kaplan, head of Business Innovation Factory, one of the leading, literally one of the leading big thinking organizations. Your summit's ranked as the #2 most important innovative business event of the year, according to, was it Inc. magazine? Was that the Inc.?
Everybody loves innovation until it affects them.
Everybody loves, right? And everybody loves a good conference, right? I mean, let's get to it. Want to thank our friends at Deepwater Wind for all their help in putting this together. Okay, Saul Kaplan, we met last week this time and we had a conversation. You had just come back from Chicago and talking about community colleges. I think during that period of time, news editor Kate Nagel had broken a story about CCRI's new Promise program and some of the struggles they're having on it, and that one of their solutions that they're looking at is lowering the standards from a 2.5 GPA down to a 2.0 grade point average. That set off some alarms across the state. And what's your thought on how we're approaching the reform? How do we help more folks get started in their careers?
Yep. So first of all, let's start with the notion that it is really good policy to focus in on higher ed, and particularly good policy to focus on community college, right? It is a linchpin capability right at the center of the core issue, which is how do we take youth, right, that needs a boost and get them confident and relevant.
Right.
And it's often the bridge to a four-year college or into the workplace. So I applaud the focus on community college. This is happening across the country, and we need to innovate and think much bigger than we do about community college. So the particular policies, I think, are always going to go after several aspects of it. They're going to start with financial help and access as one of the barriers,
right.
And the Promise program is trying to do that, to take away the cost as an obstacle, for folks that want to go to community college. I think what we're learning is it's not as easy as that even if you take away the obstacle, the financial obstacle, that there are still other challenges, right? I saw an amazing statistic in the report that CCRI put out. I'm sure you caught it. 73% of the students that come out of our K-12 system right, need some form of remediation, which means they need help before they're even ready to take on community college level coursework.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if we're going to talk about community college, we're also going to have to go back and talk about what do we need to do in K through 12.
100%.
Let's focus on community college for a second. But this is what they're dealing with, right? How do you take folks who need help just to get to that level? And so now you got to play with the dials, right? So you play with the financial dials. You're calling out what's the right hurdle in terms of the grades in coursework. You also saw it wasn't just the lowering from a 2.5 to a 2.0. It was also a requirement or a hurdle to get over that said you had to take 30 credit hours.
Yeah.
Which is a full load.
Yeah.
Right? And so now you have to look at the individuals and say, wait a minute. Right? Why is it that they're dropping out? Is it just because they can't attain the grade, or is it because school doesn't fit into their lifestyle?
So let's break these down a little bit.
Right.
Let's talk about grade. I'm going to bark a little bit on this one because there's been so much grade inflation across the board, not just at community colleges, state universities, premier higher education, that a 2.5 is a pretty low grade point average. I mean, that's breathing, showing up, maybe getting some coursework in. The idea that we're going to drop that even lower, we'd done a story the year before that there's an aid nonprofit that offers students, women who have children, free diapers and some other support. Right. You have to have a 3.0 to be eligible for that program.
Right.
Just dumbing it down, isn't that symptomatic of the problems at K through 12, which is we just kept passing people along on the conveyor belt?
That's why I started with the discussion about K through 12. But I don't think just isolating the grade point average.
Oh, I'm just taking that as one.
Because here's the thing.
Yeah.
When we think about college, the way we grew up,
Right.
it was 4 years. You went out of high school, you spent 4 years to get a bachelor's degree. If it's community college, you went 2 years and you got a degree. It was a piece of paper, right? And
Right.
it said that you took so many courses worth so many credits and you got this grade. That's the way we think about college today. Wait a minute.
Listen, only about 10% of community college students at CCRI over the past decade graduate in 3 years.
No kidding.
10%.
40% drop out in a year is
Right.
what they learned
Right.
now. So something's going on here. This is not about what's the hurdle they have to get over, the grade they have to get in a class. This is, what are we teaching them? Is it relevant? Is it helping them see a better future to go out into the workforce? And I think I have to keep coming back to, are we delivering it in a way that respects and fits into their lifestyle, right? These folks have conditions, they've got work they have to do, they have jobs, they have family situations, they're sitting in communities where they worry about safety and food security.
Yep.
And poverty levels. I mean, we call this, the fancy term for this are the social determinants of learning,
Right.
So to think that you can just take a traditional college program, I don't care whether it's community college or a 4-year degree, and make it fit for those individuals that are struggling with all these other aspects in their communities and in their lives. We've got to come back and reshape this. The other thing we have to do is we have to look at, are we teaching them competencies that are relevant to the workforce?
Right.
It's not a piece of paper and a degree and a GPA, right? When's the last time someone asked you what your GPA was? Right?
Literally never.
Can you remember?
No, and I was so disappointed. I worked so hard to get a
Because you probably had a
half-decent
good one, you said,
GPA. And I remember going to job interviews and no one really asked you what your GPA was.
Here's what matters. Competence and proficiency.
Well, I was not good on the confidence, so I was hoping that the GPA
Make it up
would
with a
work.
piece of paper and the grades
Yeah,
that,
that's right.
that said you were better than you really were, right? But we're talking here about competence that's relevant in the real world. We're talking about the confidence and the skills, to be able to show up in the workforce and to be able to go get a job,
Right.
And so we got to retune what we're doing, and today the terminology is about what's the pathway.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks this pathway is about the traditional college that we went to, and it isn't. So are we transforming it? Are we innovating around student experience? Does it fit into their lifestyle? Does it fit into their work schedule? Right? All of these things, not just whether we made it free, right? But what could they...
So all those are, without a doubt, but it doesn't look like the construct that we're now developing, and I understand that we're only in year one, but listen, we had a baseline last year, we know what's going on. Do we need to really rethink this process? And I'm not, the investment is not so significant, it's $3 million, but it doesn't seem to be aligning with what we're trying to do. And you've got so much experience in working with other community colleges around the country, and we've had other discussions here on GoLocal Live about what's the process. Because we're living in an economy right now, it really doesn't matter what you learn, it's your ability to learn and that you have the skills to learn.
And to keep learning
and to keep learning.
Right. No, I agree. So here's what I do know. I do know, that I think the president at CCRI, I don't know her personally, but I've heard a lot about her. She's an innovator, and she didn't come from a traditional background. She brings a lot of energy, is trying hard to change things. I believe, from what I've heard, she's receptive to experimenting with different ways and to solve these problems.
Right.
But she lives in a world, that's pretty traditional,
Right.
with a lot of barriers to changing different aspects of it.
Right.
Try to tell the faculty, down at CCRI, that we want them to play a different role and have responsibility for different kinds of coaching and mentoring, than what they traditionally do in their classrooms.
Yep.
That's no easy thing to pull off. I think she's trying. I think there are a lot of obstacles. I think what we need to do is not just the administration there or the folks up at the State House, or in the commissioner's office. I think we all have to rally around this problem, and we have to give them the room and the conditions, to change the model. That's about a pathway, from communities and from families, through community college, maybe to a four-year college, maybe directly into the workforce. And we've got to be willing to experiment with different ways to do this. So I applaud the effort, but you can't just isolate one dimension. And what they've learned is that they're going to have to tweak the model they have, right? And they're going to have to change it.
So let me ask you a question. I think we now have a clear picture that the data's, pretty solid, that the type of student who's looking to go to a community college in Rhode Island is underprepared to meet the academic requirements. Should we start thinking about this really as a 6-year program, that the first 4 years need to be remedial for a year or two, probably 2 based on what the dropout rates are and the underachievement, and then 2 years of much more of a traditional community college rigor? Then that gets them either into the workforce with with an initial certification or degree.
Some of the most interesting programs, and we've been doing some work here in Rhode Island on this, you're absolutely right, are programs that start while you're still in high school and start the process, get people acclimated to what college level work is, and have a smooth transition where they've taken some college courses, and then they make a smoother transition into post-secondary or to college, whether it's CCRI or one of the other public or private colleges here. I think that's a smart idea. We have to look at...
Is the public willing to spend, listen, we're the 7th, 8th, 9th highest in per pupil spending in the country. Our teachers are very well paid. Our outcomes do not reflect the amount that we invest. Is the public ready to say, well, we're not efficient over here, so we're going to reinvest over there, or are you just going to see the backlash against the whole thing?
This is the problem with all innovation in a public sector sense, because everybody wants to keep doing what we're doing today, and then they want to add new things to it, and we don't have the growth and the revenue to do it. What it requires is exploring new models, that is able to free up resources to start to change from the way it works today to the way we want it to work, There's more than enough money in the system, but we have to think about what I call lifelong learning. It starts with even pre-K and preschool, We know that that's important. It goes all the way through K through 12. It goes post-secondary, and then let's throw workforce development, into the mix. Let's actually think about the pathway for Rhode Island citizens, from the time children are born and they're in preschool all the way through and into the workforce. And then, as we've talked many times, it's not just about getting out and getting your first job. It's about having the confidence and the competence to be able to reinvent yourself throughout your career, because careers are going to change. So how do we help people to stay on that reinvention curve so that they're relevant to the work as the work is changing?
Gary Sass mentioned the idea of a voucher, that it wouldn't just be eligible, that sort of commitment by Rhode Island wouldn't just be applicable to CCRI, might be applicable to New England Tech or some other higher education. What's your thought on that?
Well, this has been tried in a lot of places around the country. It isolates the payment mechanism, and it also is trying to put pressure on consumer and family choice. So that you could take it.
And also put some pressure on CCRI. Listen, you either up the game, you find some more innovative ways, because if you can't do it, why can't New England Tech do it if they can start producing people for the next...
There are parts of that idea that I really like, which are there's multiple pathways, and students and families should have more freedom and more choice to get to a pathway that's right for their children.
Over just the Warwick campus or the Lincoln campus of CCRI.
Which would put more pressure back on the system to innovate, to get better, to transform the student experience. So there are parts of that idea that I like, but when the rubber hits the road on that idea, you have a lot of schools that aren't up to the task, and it creates a lot of pain for local communities when they're not, So moving to that idea is easier to say in theory than it is to execute. There is one thing that's certainly true, that our entire education and workforce development system is going to have to be transformed, not just tweaked, and that we should be aggressively exploring and testing new models, playing with all those dials, not just how we pay for it, but how we measure outcomes, how we deliver, what are the roles of administration.
Well, listen, what do we
players,
see?
all
Was
of
it a week ago, 10 days ago, Mount Ida College up in
Right.
Newton, Mass, out of business in the middle of a semester, gone.
This is happening all across the country to schools that benefited off of the baby boomers' kids when the market was thriving.
Right.
That all of a sudden the market isn't there, so now the fight for every student.
Right.
Right. And the problem that we started talking about, which is typically what happens at the community college level, are the folks that are the least prepared, that need the most help, and we're not creating new models aggressively enough to be able to help them. So I think the Promise program is a good idea. I think they're right to try to play with the dials and to change the model. I think that they should be bolder in doing it, and we as citizens and stakeholders in the community should be really supportive of let's do more in our post-secondary system, particularly on the public school side, right? Because we need these platforms to get much stronger if we're going to have a 21st century workforce here, right? It's not only important to our economy, right, and to job creation, it's important to our communities. And so this is one where I think we should be all in, and we should be looking for solutions and not pointing fingers at this worked, this didn't work. Let's just keep trying stuff until we can get to models that move people to where we need them to be so that they can be self-sustaining.
Your nickname has been Mr. Innovation. We may rename it Mr. Fix-It. Let's jump over to UHIP. We've spent $500 million on UHIP.
Yeah.
Deming Sherman was here a couple weeks ago. Kate Nagel unveiled, I don't think it had been reported before, based on special master appointed by the federal courts to oversee the food stamp, that the application is 40 pages. We jumped on that. We contacted Department of Health and Human Services in the governor's office. I think they were both shocked that it was a 40-page application.
Right.
We did get the application that day. It is, in fact, 40 pages. You reviewed the
application?
application?
Yes, I have now. Yes, you called me out last week because I talked about it without having actually gone through the 40 pages. I have now gone through the 40 pages, and it turns out I was right last week. It's an amalgamation of 5 programs.
Absolutely.
And they designed it. If they weren't able to change the federal programs and the requirements for each of the programs, they put together an application. It actually labels what program where, but it's very confusing. It's like a treasure map, like trying to figure out, okay, I want that program, and I have to answer questions 1, 12, 23.
It is absolutely unbelievable.
Right.
I was
it's
lost.
all there.
I was lost by page 2.
Yeah.
Forget the directions; impossible to read.
Yeah.
But let's talk about it. I mean, realistically, here is an application that is designed for the poorest people in the community, the people that are most in distress, or that you were living one level of lifestyle, and because of your own economy, because of market conditions, because of something terrible happening, you are now dropping and forced to apply for some level or multiple levels of federal assistance. How could, I'm just perplexed at how could anybody think this was a good idea, or was it, the most worrisome thing is, does just no one care?
No, I don't think that's true. I think a lot of people care. I think just like we talked about in...
How long's your contract you send? When you get the gate, I mean, the people that advertise with us, I think our contract's 2 or 3 pages.
The contract we send is 2 or 3 pages. The contract most of these organizations send is 40 pages. It's the 40-page deal.
And are they giving you food stamps, or are they giving you $1 million?
I don't know. They ask a lot of questions that aren't relevant to the project that we're trying to do, but it's the standard. This is the way the world works, right? Everyone creates these forms and these programs that apply to a broad set of use cases, right? And when you come in, you only have one. You have one thing you're trying to do. So you have to navigate your way through it, right? So this is just like what we talked about before. It's a systems challenge that you need a system solution. So here's a situation where all of these programs each has a home, typically federally. Some of them are in different agencies.
Yeah.
And even within the same agency, everyone's got rules and eligibility requirements. And the real innovation here would be to actually go from the family in Rhode Island to the experience they have to get at the resources to improve the pathway for their family. And instead of all these straws where money comes down through programs that are very tight, that don't talk to one another.
Right.
Right? What the innovation is, go the other way. Go from what problem we're trying to solve, and then put together a solution, including an application, that meets the needs of that family. Instead, what you have are 5 different programs burdened by incredibly bureaucratic processes for which the state does not have the ability to change without permission from the feds.
I get all
right?
that, but let's talk about this within the context of what has taken place.
Yep.
It's not like these 5 things came together and there was no support for implementing in a process. We have spent, between federal and matching state dollars, $500 million.
Crazy.
I know that's a small number over at Biff.
Oh, stop.
But here in the trenches,
That's real money.
$500 million and an expectation to.
Right.
Wouldn't you think that the application, just walking through the work process, might be one of those things that should be a priority?
Yeah.
How do we get?
I
How do we break that?
I can tell you, having done my short stint as an accidental bureaucrat,
Yeah.
I can tell you what happens. You go into these projects with lofty aspirations about how you're going to make all these changes, and it's going to be better for families and citizens. It's going to be better for the government. It's going to be better for the taxpayer. And then what happens is you crash into the reality of the rules and bureaucracies of each of and they say, if you want to be an administrator of the SNAP program locally, you will follow these 8,000 steps. You will use these things in your form. And so all those lofty aspirations of making it easier for folks, right, get hit against the brick wall of bureaucracy or the time it would take to change it. Now, I know you like to say we can get waivers, but even the process of getting waivers is usually bureaucratic.
Okay, we're 5 years in, and that no one's asked for a waiver.
Right.
I mean, here's reality.
Do you know
500,
that? Do you know no one's asked for a waiver?
500 million, 5 years, no request for waivers,
Wow.
and they are just beginning the process to redesign the application.
Well, believe me, I am not sitting here saying that it was $500 million well spent. You know my point of view about this,
right?
That these systems projects should be done in a completely different way. Figure out what the experience is that you want to deliver. Figure out where the solutions live. See if instead of stick building a piece of software, spending all of that money on the systems integrators, and consultants, of which I was one for a lot of years, right? Those projects don't get done that way anymore, right? Those projects get done typically with applications that are sitting in the cloud, with a user-centered front end, that's local,
right,
and stuff that happens behind the scenes. So
I'm not betting much that when Biff goes in and analyzes a project, that at any point a 40-page, how many questions? Literally hundreds of questions is part of the outcome of the delivery system. I just think this one is, not only the time, not only the cost.
Oh, I agree.
But it is a almost the biggest issue is that nobody looked at who is the constituency we're trying to serve in public service, and that all of this needed to be really designed to help people get through a process, a painful process.
Well, I wasn't there at the beginning. I wasn't there at the beginning to look at this. This was prior to the current administration.
Correct.
Right? But I wasn't there to look at it. I'm guessing it was too centered on agencies and efficiencies and trying to save money on the process.
Right.
And it should have started with customer experience, citizen experience. What's the job they're trying to do, and how do we make their lives easier?
Right.
And yes, could we do that more efficiently? What we end up doing is trying to make the agency delivery model more efficient, right? And we forget that it didn't add any value to someone who just wanted to get at the program, right? And we made it harder to do that. And then you get the internal issue of all the people that are employed to deliver the solution the way it's delivered today, right? And now you're saying, I've got a whole new workflow. I want you to work in a different way, and oh, maybe we're going to take 20% of you out, right?
So let me ask you a
it
question.
drives weird behaviors.
Two of the gubernatorial candidates, Fung and Feroce,
Yep.
have come up with tax cut ways to reinvent, those baseline of their economic plan.
Yep.
Is it time to be either revenue neutral, or maybe it's going to even cost more? Is it time for somebody to run for governor saying, you know what, we're going to innovate state government. We're going to break everything down. We're going to look at how it should be delivered. We're going to find best practices in the United States, not only in government, but also in the private sector. And we're going to make this a place in which business can do everything online, that the consumer doesn't need to be tortured at the DMV, that really that's the way to make Rhode Island a much more better place to live, quality of living, and also a much more competitive place.
Well, my short answer to that is yes. I've often said both political parties, nobody gets a high grade from me, in terms of delivering on that promise. People will make it.
Right.
Politicians love to make the promise you just made.
Yeah.
But now when it comes to actually delivering it, it requires the use of not just actual financial capital,
Yep.
it requires the use of political capital, right? Because those things require a change from status quo. And I don't need to tell you how much resistance there is to those kinds of changes, right? And all those arguments that get made, like this is going to hurt citizens, they're worried about it's going to hurt them and their jobs. We should be starting with the premise of let's make the citizens' lives better, right? Let's make it easier for them to get at these programs. And that's not just here locally. We got a huge, how much of this resource is coming down through those straws federally,
100%.
attached with huge bureaucracies that we end up saying, I can't change it, therefore I'll work around it. And it's the aggregate total of all those workarounds that produce the mess that we see. And now you come in as a new politician,
Right.
And you promise we're going to clean it up. But cleaning it up is hard work because it changes everything about the way we deliver through these federal agencies. It probably requires a rethinking of the very agencies themselves. Why are we organized this way? Why aren't we organized?
But it goes to your point that Rhode Island should be the petri dish. It should be the place of experimentation.
Yes, it should.
It should be where the federal delegation goes to agency X and says, hey, we need some latitude on this.
Yep.
What's it going to cost you?
Yep.
We need a waiver on this. And listen, we've gotten waivers on hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to redesign how we deliver different social service programs. Maybe that's what the next strategy needs to be.
So my wonky way of saying that was always Rhode Island is a unique place for innovation at scale.
Right.
Our environment should hypothetically make it easier to explore, test, and then roll out transformed models for education, healthcare, government services, right? Instead, we look like everywhere else, except we don't have the scale to compete.
Absolutely.
Right? So in fact, our size becomes a disadvantage, right? As opposed to flipping it and turning our size.
Well, listen, the reason for UHIP was to bring 5 distinct programs together. It was supposed to be an innovation, right? And other states aren't doing that. And what, in fact, did we produce? A much more complex process.
Correct.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This was a action-packed half hour here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center on Business Monday. I do want to let you know for about a nanosecond, it almost looked like the sun was going to come out, and now it's back to raining.
Heck of a day to run a marathon, huh?
It is. I think you should get 2 medals if you can run a marathon in this freezing cold, miserable weather. Saul Kaplan, thanks so much as always. Thank everybody for tuning in. Tomorrow afternoon we've got lifestyle, and then we've got some news and politics. We're starting at 3 o'clock. Keep an eye out. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.